The situation in Venezuela is one that has been disturbing a lot of folks. We are getting, of course, folks in Venezuela, they are more concerned about this than anybody else, as they should be. However, it is always easy to jump on something that's happening now, and there is always causation. There is always something that led to something where we are. Decided to go this week to a writer and a reporter in New York City because she has been covering Central and South America for as long as I can remember. All the time in New York, she was the go-to person, still is, for issues affecting this part of the region. She's a New York-based and independent writer photographer, and her name is Karen Juanita Corello. Karen, a very good morning to you. How are you? Good morning to you, Karen.
Good morning.
There we are. It is great to have you here. This situation in Venezuela, as I mentioned, you've been covering this every time in New York. We want to get information on this part of the world. You were the one coming in. Now, we are closest to Venezuela, so one would argue, hey, why don't you just step across there and get a perspective from there? But you have been looking at it from the big picture for a long time. So I'm going to start this and ask you, while we hear reports coming in to Trinidad and Tobago, and those reported even in the United States, as to what's going on in Venezuela. As a prize-winning journalist and writer specializing in Central and South American politics, is the story of Venezuela's collapse that's being reported without bias and in context? That's my question.
Well, in the last year, coverage of Venezuela has never been unbiased.
Do you have me on speakerphone by chance, Karen? Because if you do, I am getting other noises coming in.
Oh, okay.
If you can take me off the speakerphone and get to the mouthpiece, that would make it a lot easier for us all.
Hi, can you hear me better?
There you go. Now that's 1,000% better. So my question, I think you were able to hear my question.
Yes, I was.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying that in terms of, I'm sorry, my children are in the back, but the coverage of Venezuela has been biased for the past 20 years based on what your economic viewpoint is, for mostly even for journalists. Prior to Chavez being in power, there was a very neoliberal policy in the country, and which is basically, a more capitalist, socialist oriented policy. With that, you had people who were very prosperous on one side, and there were people who were extremely poor. After Chavez came into power, they did a lot of socialist programs that led to poor people having more opportunity. And a lot of these poor people are people who I cover who tended to be black people in Venezuela. But with their advancement in society, there's been a lot of bias coverage that, what Chavez was doing was socializing the country in a way that wasn't to the benefit of the country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the coverage now, you're really looking at people who are saying, well, what Chavez did resulted in this. And I just don't think it's fair. I think, especially when you look at the recent history of Venezuela, you can almost say that it's sort of come full circle. Prior to Chavez, the neoliberal policies tried to deal with an oil crisis, and it led to riots and problems in the country. And, of course, we're having an oil crisis again in the country. And there's a way to deal with it that a lot of people believe that the current president, Maduro, is not handling well.
Well, let us see if we can take this. If you ever have to start from the beginning, you have to go way back and spend lots of time trying to trace where the problem is. Let's just pick it up from the Chavez era. President Chavez got in there. He had some plans, as you said. They were called socialist. And he angered many of the major countries, particularly the United States, with his direction. But I don't want to go into that, except where, in fact, it interfered with the moving forward status of Venezuela. I do want to deal instead with what he tried to do, because Venezuela has the world's biggest oil reserve, the biggest, more than Saudi Arabia. So there is a lot of potential there. My question is, true, I understand what has happened with the drop in oil prices and so on, but the many economies that are crippled as a consequence of that. But somewhere in between there, you would expect with all this money coming in, you would have something like what we have in Trinidad called a stabilization fund, some rainy day things to cushion the impact of something like this. But start with the Chavez experiment. With all this money coming in, was in fact all this money coming in? And if it was, why didn't we have a cushion for when we get to where we are now?
I think that they did have a cushion. The problem is the value of their money has let the cushion, I guess, just get too big that it won't support. And like I said, I think it's the same as what happened previously with oil prices. I mean, oil has been the major moneymaker for the country. So whenever there's a problem with oil, there's always going to be problems in Venezuela. They need to diversify their economy a little bit more. It's diverse, but they have to have it a little more advanced in the future.
Writer from New York City is Karen Juanita Carrello, who is my guest here. Let's talk about the ambition of the Chavez experiment. Was it too ambitious in the sense of attempting to lift so many people? The policy, was it a flawed policy that would have led to where we are in concert, of course, with the drop in oil prices? But would that you say would have been a contributor to where Venezuela finds itself today? The policies of President Chavez.
Reforms of Chavez in the same way as in the United States we had basically socialist reforms under former President Franklin Roosevelt, which lifted a lot of people out of poverty, and by lifting a lot of people into the middle class, it buttressed the economy so that we had more than mostly in the United States. Our military is products that we produce for the military really are much of our economy. But with the building up of the middle class and the support for old age people through the reforms of the Great Depression, I think that helped our economy so much. And that's the way I look at the reforms of Chavez, is that by building more of a middle class, you'll have a future that is not just only supported on oil.
There is this a term that's used all the time. What would Reagan have done? What would Elvis have done? Question is, if you can hazard, what would President Chavez had done with this downturn? And I'm asking you that because I want to follow it up with asking you, what is President Nicolas Maduro not doing to reassure followers of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, which is his party, that these tough times will not last? And what is he doing or not doing to continue holding his constituents together?
I think that's the major problem, and I've had this discussion with a lot of my sources in Venezuela. There are a lot of issues with it. Maduro is not Chavez, and that's the major problem. Chavez not only was able to govern effectively by what he instituted, but also by force of his personality. Maduro has a different personality, and it's not to fault him, but it's just that he will never be Chavez. And not being Chavez means that he can't control, you have corruption in the government. And Chavez had corruption in the government. We have corruption in most governments in the world. But Chavez was able to control the corruption in the government mainly by embarrassing the politicians who were corrupt whenever he got the opportunity to on national television, by addressing them in a way of, brotherhood, and this is not what we do for Venezuela. Maduro, people look at him and they don't sort of have that same degree of, let's say, respect. And with that lack of respect, he's not able to lead the party, and therefore lead people who would follow the party and want to continue voting for the party. So that's a lot of the problem that a lot of my sources are saying, is that in the end, it's not only the oil prices and the problems in the government and the problems going on. Of course, Maduro can't create policies that'll take care of it all. But if he could at least, give assurance just by his own posture, that would help.
You spoke about the privileged class, which formed the opposition in Venezuela. A lot of folks are not very clear as to how long this opposition has been, because it was, in fact, there from even before Chavez. I mean, they were controlling stuff. Chavez got in there. They lost power, and this has been going on for a long time, which led to the coup, well, at least a reported coup that was never a coup, and recognition by the United States of this successful coup that never happened. Speak to the opposition in Venezuela so we get some perspective as to what is working against efforts of President Maduro.
Well, the opposition, they've been comical, really, during the presidency of Chavez, because, like I said again, they didn't have anybody who was a leader who was inspirational. At the moment, a lot of people who do like the opposition do find Leopoldo Lopez, who's the current sort of leader of the opposition, they find him inspirational. I personally think he has a Jesus complex, but he is providing that inspiration for people. But the inspiration is the only thing they're providing. The problem the opposition has had for a while is that they can't really propose programs that are going to help to change what's going on. During Chavez, they basically said they wanted to go back in and take away all of the programs that Chavez had instituted and set the government back to where it was before. Well, no one wanted to hear that, so they never got in power. Now, there have been more problems. There have been corruption has been a little bit higher. There's been crime. So the opposition has been able to gain some leverage just by saying that, we'll be different from those corrupt politicians. They still haven't really come up with programs that are going to help the larger mass of people. But, like I said, unfortunately, Maduro's party doesn't have anything to propose differently and doesn't have a leadership that will inspire people. So there's that tug of war at the moment.
And there's a reason that I went there, because before the state of emergency, there were serious challenges being put to the Maduro government, from the opposition. And some folks wonder if it's the challenge that was so great coming from there was in fact the reason for the state of emergency, or was it merely because the citizenry is rebelling? So I sort of look at the government in the first instance, but I know you speak to people on the ground all the time in Venezuela. Make clear for us exactly how bad is the situation underground from those you're speaking to.
It's pretty bad. I feel bad for a lot of people. I haven't been there in a few years, and I was actually planning to go maybe a month or two ago, but changed my plans because people said it's not really worth coming here right now. It's very difficult. Access to food, access to medicine, even just access to money is very difficult. You have threats of being challenged on the street by criminals. It's bad, to say the least. And yeah, again, that's one of those fronts that Maduro needs to. I don't know. I can't explain to him, or it would be hard for me to say, well, you need to do this, but Chavez would have handled it differently, and Maduro's just not doing that.
Right, and journalist Karen Juanita Carrello is joining us from New York City. We're looking at the situation in Venezuela through her eyes. She's been studying Central and South America for many, many years and writing on it. I know that Chavez made overture, including the Petro-Caribbean. Of course, he's been working with a number of the Central American neighbors. Can Venezuela expect, the current president made a trip to Trinidad and Tobago. There was some fruitful economic trade and security discussions here with Trinidad and Tobago, but places like Brazil, like Cuba, other Central American countries, can Venezuela expect any assistance in these dire times coming from them, or are they in just as bad a basket or worse and unable to so do?